Greetings and welcome back to my channel. I'm glad you're here today. I am trying to talk more slowly so I don't sound so crazy. Let's talk about some new releases, some new old releases, and just some old records I found in a store I discovered out in Massapequa, Long Island. As I've stated multiple times in the past, at least it's my opinion, that jazz artists are usually the last people to press to vinyl because it's just too expensive in their small market. And some artists have told me they just don't want to lug it around from gig to gig, as all contemporary jazz artists take CDs and sell them at gigs. But that is definitely starting to change. Publicists are now starting to take up jazz artists who are pressing on vinyl, and some of them quite surprising. Of course, we have JMI here in New York that does great new vinyl. International Anthems, another label, and there are other labels, Sam's First on the West Coast, who have brought vinyl pressing back to jazz artists. I will be getting most of the record store day releases, and I'll be reviewing those as I receive them. I don't see a point in doing a preview if I don't have any records to talk about. But let's get into some of these new records I just received. The first being Anna Butterss' Mighty Vertebrate. Now, I do have a handful of International Anthem records that I'm going to review, but my general feeling about this label is sometimes they produce tremendous records like the Desron Douglas, but then other times they produce records that are not jazz at all, and that's probably part of what they do anyway, that are more like electronic records. But some of those kind of leave me a little cold, but we'll get into that in the full review. But this is an interesting record that includes Josh Johnson on saxophone, Gregory Allman on guitar, Ben Lunsdane on drums, and Butterss on upright bass. So these new records I've received, there's a theme. This is by a bassist, and two other of these new records are also by bassists. So funny that, right? Another living artist and a bassist who is releasing jazz vinyl is bassist Ben Wolfe, who's a very well-known bassist in the city. I don't know where he lives, but he's recorded with Wynton Marsalis and many people. And this is a solo, well, it's not a solo bass record. The Understated. Orrin Evans on piano, Aaron Kimmel on drums, Russell Malone, the late Russell Malone, who just passed a few weeks ago, and Sullivan Fortner on piano. So what a great lineup. Aaron Kimmel and Sullivan Fortner, those dudes are delivering the goods. So there's the insert, the inner sleeve. Photos. So I'm looking forward to hearing this. Now this is interesting, a new JMI record by the bassist Max Gerl, all analog solo bass produced by Stanley Clarke. So, and has a nice gatefold on JMI. I love solo bass records because bass does so many things that are great ways to judge a system. You have tone. Very often, depending on the recording won't capture the full body of the instrument. I remember back in the 70s, people like Eddie Gomez and others were using those pickup contact mics on their bass, which really only got the fingers and right there at the hole. So you got all this surface sound, but you didn't get any really low-end sound. It's funny, if you listen back to the original mono copies of the Miles Davis' first great quintet, a really good system will replicate the entire length of Paul Chambers' bass, because it was definitely recorded, and you can hear the whole thing top to bottom. Nothing falls out. You really get an impression of, you know, the body of the bass instrument, the resonance of that large open cavity, and you get an idea of the texture on a really good recording. So those are all things I'm looking for on a solo bass record. If it's boomy or if it's tight, it's weird. I bought a few months ago the new Christian McBride. It was a duo bass recording, and I didn't get past the music because the recording was so bad, which was kind of surprising. It sounded like it was recorded on a stage in a high school auditorium, and I think that's about what it was. Just it wasn't up front, it was distant. It was just a really bad recording. I forgot who the other player was, a really well-known player. Anyway, good bass recording, solo, are hard to come by. So I'm really excited to hear this. Max Gerl, or Max Gerl, all analog solo bass, produced by Stanley Clarke. Another new recording by a band I've only heard on CD that I really love, called Forq. I don't know what label this is. It's hard to figure it out by looking at the label. Maybe it's his own label. But I used to, when I played more CDs, when I was reviewing gear, I would use the Forq because the sound was extremely fat and immediate. And it's sort of modern day fusion, but it doesn't have any of the fusion, what that would indicate, kind of it was just more funk than anything else. It sort of reminds me of Cameo meets Kraftwerk. I don't know, super funky, super in your face. I haven't listened to this yet, but I've loved their last 2 CDs that I heard. Their group includes Henry Hay on keyboard, one of the great keyboard players around these days. Chris McQueen on guitar. It's pretty much the same group. Jason J.T. Thomas on drums, Kevin Scott on bass, the great James Genus on bass, Ryan Scott on guitar, Josh Dion on drums, another tremendous drummer, Jordan Peters on bass, and Lucy Woodward on voice. So just state-of-the-art, in the grip, funk, cool synth melodies. I'm really excited to hear this. I believe it's all instrumental. Yeah, Lucy Woodward, who is isn't she an actress? Anyway, Forq, another really exciting record to come on Red Hook Records. Breaking the Shell by Bill Frisell, Kit Downs on organ, and Andrew Cyrille on drums. Recorded May 2, 2022, St. Luke in the Fields, New York City. When I first saw this cover, I don't know why, but I thought, is this a new Floating Points record? I don't know why I thought that, but this should be really interesting if I can get this stuff out. Comes with an insert, so there's the press release. Not that you care about that. Lydia Liebman promotion. Lydia Liebman is Dave Liebman's daughter, and she has quickly risen to the forefront of a PR machine here in New York City. Handles a lot of great artists. Of course, the great Bill Frisell, needs no introduction. Kit Downs on organ, who I think of as a UK artist. And Andrew Cyrille, who also needs no introduction, is known for his work with Cecil Taylor, his own records. I saw him a couple years at Winter Jazz Fest, which I'm going to cover hopefully this year for Downbeat, and he was just phenomenal. But I don't know if his drumming always translates into the recorded performance. Anyway, this should be exciting. Breaking the Shell. Another sort of genre-breaking artist, Simon Moellier, Elements of Light. Includes Moellier on vibraphone, Lex Corton on piano, Rick Rosato on bass, and Jungkook Kim on drums, with special guest performances by Gerl Clayton on piano and the great Marquise Hill on trumpet. This is on Candid, who've been doing a lot of reissues of Mink, of Mingus, and for Booker Irvin. So this should be really interesting. A singular blend of dynamic post-bop and electronic production, which means it could be really great or it could totally suck. Now, an artist I don't really know, but the 2 people in his trio are phenomenal. Saxophonist Darius Jones, legend of eBoi, the hyper-vigilant eye. This trio includes Gerald Cleaver on drums and Chris Lightcap on bass. Chris Lightcap I think of as a friend of mine. I've interviewed him a couple times. He lives out in off the F train stop in Brooklyn. And I've interviewed Gerald Cleaver. Gerald Cleaver is a state-of-the-art straight-ahead player. He's also an avant-garde player and also a great electronic music production dude. So this should be interesting. I don't really know what to expect. As you know, Craft Recordings has got their hands full with all kind of reissues, including these great, they've brought back the Prestige Bluesville imprint, which is a pretty daring move, I think, because I don't think the average listener under 40 has any idea what the blues even means, who the artists are, nothing. At the Jazz Record Center right now, we have a really fat blues section, which came out of a larger collection Fred bought. All the jazz records are gone. Most of the blues records are still sitting there. I think people just don't even know what it is. It's like prehistoric music. So it's exciting that they took the nerve to reissue these records, and these blues records are much harder to find than any jazz record, because even fewer were pressed. So anyway, the 3 I have here that I want to delve into a little further: Albert King Livewire Blues Power, Albert King, of course, the godfather of Stevie Ray Vaughan. Skip James Today. And Lightnin' Hopkins' Last Night Blues with Sonny Terry. I love Lightnin' Hopkins. I love Lightnin' Hopkins, B.B. King, Bobby Blue Bland, even though he's not really a blues singer. There's just so many rabbit holes to go down with blues music, and it's just really, really hard to find. I'm sure it was all reissued on a CD, but in the vinyl world, this stuff is hard to find, so good stuff. The good folks at Elemental Music have been very good to me, and they just sent me 5 new reissues. I think these are already out, but anyway, this is cool. Pharoah Sanders' Village of the Pharaohs. I think this is like mid-period Pharoah Sanders on Impulse. Pharoah Sanders' Wisdom Through Music. And I honestly, we had a copy at the store and I spun it and I wasn't crazy about it, but I'll give it a deeper listen and report back. And 2 Antonio Carlos Jobim records that have been available before as reissues, but I guess they're doing it new. Virgin Vinyl. Wave. So they're hitting some CTI titles. Of course, all the CTI records were cut by Rudy Van Gelder at Englewood Cliffs. And I don't know who did the work on these. It doesn't say up front who did the remastering the vinyl. But also, and this is really great, I'm really excited about this, Wes Montgomery, A Day in the Life. You know, there's the Wes Montgomery also on CTI, Down Here on the Ground, is a phenomenal record. It's funny how people trash CTI. I've seen people just trash it, you know. Is it all great? No. Did CTI sort of create the template for smooth jazz? Probably, with those Bob James records. But those Bob James records are also a big part of hip-hop. All those records were heavily sampled by all kind of guys. And, you know, I love Good King Bad on CTI, George Benson, Little Sunflower, the other Down Here on the Ground, as well as A Day in the Life. There's just a bunch of those records, and CTI records are very hard to find now. Even a couple of the Diodato records are good, some are not. But worth looking at. Last week I was hanging out with a friend of mine, Matt Hanks, who's a vice president at Surefire Media, one of the biggest publicists in America, and he's a hardcore audiophile. We were hanging out with him and Alex Halberstadt. John DeVore was there, a couple other dudes. Matt has a really great system. He has a refurbished Thorns 124, just like I do, and he was running a beautiful mono cart on it into his Shindo electronics, like I have, into his DeVore 96 speakers, which I used to have. So we were just having like a blow-up party, and these guys had bought records from 2 stores out in Long Island I'd never heard of before. In Massapequa, called I just forgot the name of the store. Damn it. I'll insert it under my babbling mouth. And Needle and Groove, which I didn't have a chance to get to. But it, you know, after you drive out to Long Island, it's like another planet out there. It's like the suburbs, really. And I took a detour and bought a cigar and went to an inlet and sat and looked at the water. But anyway, this store, this was a great store. This store blew me away in Massapequa Park, Long Island. And I'll put the name down below. But this store had lots of used gear, which was cool. You don't see that in New York record stores. They had a great classical department. They had a great new arrivals department, but their jazz department was just absolutely freaky. It blew my mind. They had William Brecker Collective, which I think is a German group that kind of plays like souped up March Oompa jazz. And then they had like weird records by like sort of cocktail lounge artist on Atlantic Records from the early 60s, as well as the records I'm going to show you. I was shocked at some of the records I found. Alfonso Johnson Moonshadows, which is on Epic from 1976. Alfonso Johnson, Patrice Rushen, Michael Walden, Richard McKnight, and Dugo on drums. Just prime era, mid-70s. You'd call it fusion, but it's sort of not fusion. It's not like over the top and silly. You know, he has such a great low-end sound, and he's also with Jacob Astorius on Black Market, the Weatherport record, and it's very hard to tell unless you know which track each guy is on, because they're both so lyrical and They have such a great tone on their instrument. So this is fun. I paid $8 for this. The prices of this place were nuts. A recent Classics reissue, Kenny Cox, I got for $10. A record that used to be common, but now is impossible to find. Jack DeJohnette's Special Edition Irresistible Forces, which I got for $10, in the shrink wrap, which includes a great lineup. None of Us Vasconcelos, Mick Goodrick, Greg Osby, Lonnie Plaxico, the epic Gary Thomas. So there's this beautiful set of Sonor drums. You know this is the 80s. Look at that sweater. This really blew my mind. This cover looks really cheesy, but this is an early Johnny Hartman record on Regent. Regent is a precursor to Savo, I believe. Just You, Just Me. Johnny Hartman records are really hard to find. All of them are really hard to find. Even the one with Coltrane is hard to find. He has such a beautiful, deep baritone, and he's such a lyrical performer, and has so much insight into music, and he's very relaxing to listen to. I recently found at a store in Cold Spring his record on Bethlehem, and that was really great. I haven't listened to this yet, but I think it's going to be a little more of a popular kind of record. I don't know what year this is, but really psyched to get that. If you watched my channel before, you know one of my favorite jazz vocalists of all time is Carmen McRae. They had 2 copies of this for $5 a piece, so I bought both of them. You know, to me, she's the adult in the room. There's so much experience in her delivery. She has great articulation. She's very knowing. To me, she epitomizes a strong woman in jazz. She just comes off as very strong. You know, I love Ella Fitzgerald, but she's kind of even with the older Ella, she's kind of a little girl. That's part of her trip. You know, just the kind of, I mean, she definitely swings, and I love the tone of her voice. Carmen has a much deeper sound to her vocals, and it's just, in a way, it's more modern than Ella, or obviously Billie Fitzgerald. Billie Holiday, she covered a lot of contemporary songs of her time, and she did quite a few great records on mainstream. Infinity Records in Massapequa Park, that's where it was, and the very nice Chris was running the store when I was there. It was great to meet him. But she did a number of records for mainstream. If you ever run into any of her records, I say grab them. She's like Helen Merrill. When you run across her records, grab them, because you won't see them again. If you watched my recent interview series with the great drummer and professor Billy Drummond, he talked about this record, Gretch Drum Night at Birdland, which I'd had on CD before, but had never seen in the wild. $20, got some weight to it. What label is this? This was on Roulette. There's some chatter that Roulette was a mob run label, as was Old Town, which featured a lot of Arthur Prysock records. Anyway, I'm really excited to get this. Art Blakey, Charlie Persip, Elvin Jones, Philly Joe Jones. I've never heard this on a high-end stereo, so it'll be a blast. A record I've had before, but I've lost. Duo with Kenny Drew and the great Nils Henning Orsted Pedersen, one of the great bassists in jazz. Great tone, great ideas, great execution. And Kenny Drew is sort of an under-recognized hero, even though his album Undercurrent goes for big money. Another one of the cats who went to Europe and spent a lot of time. He had a trio with Nils Henning Orsted Pedersen on the Inner City label, which, like Muse and Mainstream out of New York in the 70s, just did tons of great records and pretty, nice recordings as well. Another record I'd never seen before. I was just kind of shocked to see it out there on ECM. Robie Abu Khalil, an oud player. Now, I have bought his records on CD, but never actually saw one, with Salem Kasur, Glenn Velez, Citrek Sarkissian. It's called Nafis from 1988. So it's just like, wow, all the records in the store were just, it was all kind of just, all these extremes. It was really something. Chico Freeman, Tales of Ellington. Of course, the son of the great Von Freeman from Chicago. A local radio station did a whole Von Freeman event this past weekend, and man, that guy really run the gamut from screeching, squeegeeing, squalling tenor to beautiful sort of Ben Webster, Eddie Lockjaw Davis stuff. Really impressive. And like I said, this store had Just ran the gamut of unusual stuff. Taquinho Ile Brasil, a Brazilian guitarist. I won't attempt to read the Portuguese on the back, but beautiful recording. A record, though I already have 2 copies, I always buy it when I see it, $5. The debut Micheal Brecker record on Impulse, a beautiful recording. You can hear everything that went into this recording from the great players on here: Charlie Hayden, Kenny Kirkland, Jack DeJohnette, Pat Metheny. Recorded with James Farber at the Power Station. It's a beautiful sounding record. There's just some killer tunes on here. I think this was his best record, even though he made quite a few before he died. Who can turn down an LT Blue Note classic when you see it? Leo Parker rolling with Leo. And again, they had right field releases and left field releases. Here's Black Saint Soul Note, Tim Berne Sextet from 1983. Ray Anderson, Tim Berne, Clarence Herb Robertson, Ed Scholler, and the great Paul Motion on drums. Excited to find that. Then when you go back in the past and get this first pressing, Savo Records, Stablemates, Yusef Lateef, Curtis Fuller, Hugh Lawson, Ernie Farrell, Louis Hayes. That's one side. The other side, A.K. Salim, leader and arranger. A.K. Salim was sort of a comer, and he made a couple of records, I think, for Savoy, but apparently disappeared or didn't live up to the hype. But on that side, Johnny Coles, Tommy Flanagan, Kenny Burrell, O.C. Johnson, George Vivier, John Griffin, Stablemates. And the cover is just perfect, even though there's a little tape here on the corner. But this is the original frame cover. That's what I'm talking about, you know, the colors you see on these old records. And then again, another left field, dating back to when Latin rock had become popular in the early 1970s with Santana and Malo. This was another one, Azteca, with Lenny White on drums. I mean, on Epic, on Columbia, $10. There was a big market for this kind of stuff. This group includes Lenny White III on drums, Coke Estevito on timbales, Sheila E.'s brother, I believe. Neil Schon from Journey on guitar, Mel Martin on sax, Tom Harrell on trumpet, Pete Escovedo vocals. It's just wild, and I love that cover. You know, this drawing on Mayan art almost. And then finally another bizarre record, which I'd heard of but never seen, the Johnny Almond Music Machine on Duran, British player, which includes Alan White on drums. So just a final record in a very unusual haul that I was happy about.